So we're going to start off with Atlas, the pirate game. Venturing out on the sea with your friends, finding new resources, and doing treasure maps is some of the most fun I've had in Atlas. The game has a relatively linear approach to, advancing through it. Ship combat and construction is quite enjoyable, actually. I mean, you can have a lot of fun customizing your ships. However, there is a high bar to entry of endgame PvP when it comes to attaining and constructing mythical blueprints. The recent addition of windmills, however, has made resource gathering a lot less tedious. So, that has that going for it. But the current season has a lot of problems. You still have the regular problem of people living at Freeport where they can attack you and you can't attack them. So that has stifled PvP in some respects, but for others there's been a massive barrel exploit, so barrels are cheaper than dirt essentially, and there are many stockpiled. And you couple that with an XP exploit, which allowed players to max their level soon after the season started, and this attempt to revive the game after most of its development team was put into Arc Genesis, the DLC for Arc, and then pulled back. It's just it's seemingly a disaster, this game, with no current recovery in sight. Next up is Rust. Rust is a post-apocalyptic survival game. It has a high learning curve from the beginning. Part of my own early game frustrations came from not being able to mine rocks, as they were the wrong type of rock apparently. So the game at its core is very good. It's got a blueprint system if you're playing the default official, and that is actually quite well balanced. So you'll search out for loot crates and the like and find blueprints that enables you to build better things, better weapons at your workbenches, and that helps you defend your base. But the game itself is extremely brutal. The PvP is quick and deadly, and in Rust you can lose everything. They don't just necessarily take your resources, but can take your entire base if they get in. So they'll leave you with nothing but frustration and walking away in utter defeat. And you will do that in part because of the player base. The player base, from my experience in Rust, is the most toxic I have ever experienced in 20 years of online competitive gaming. Now, I don't know if that's a badge of honor for Rust or not, but it is what it is. And the PvP is just so gruelingly punishing to the point where you can just lose everything, days worth of work, so yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted at all. Rust is a very, very hardcore survival PvP game. And no one you meet is ever friendly. DayZ. DayZ is one of my favorites in the survival craft genre. If you're a fan of survival zombie movies or TV series like The Walking Dead, like I am, and have ever wondered what it'd be like surviving in the post-apocalyptic zombie land, DayZ is the game for you. Originally starting as an armor mod, DayZ Standalone has evolved into its own game entirely, and it is amazing, just to say the least. It can be punishing. The combat is brutally realistic, as you can expect from a game evolving from a military simulator that is armor. But in short, DayZ is the kind of game where you often enjoy the experience, not just the grind for a result, which is quite rare in the genre itself. Every time you play DayZ, you don't quite know what you're in store for. You could be taken hostage, or eaten by cannibals, die of sickness or starvation. And if you survive long enough, you can begin to thrive. You can start to be a pack rat, burying your items, and eventually working your way towards building a base. But DayZ has a few negatives to it. As a solo, you will usually struggle to hit the endgame base building, which takes a lot of work and really embodies the phrase "many hands make light work." The more people you have, the easier it'll be. Raid times can also be an issue, but this will vary from server to server, as will enforcement of any server community rules. Unfortunately, you'll often be at the behest of any admins or moderation, which, in my experience, does not always go in your favor. Sometimes when you're raiding a donator's base, you can have it effectively just shut down for next to no reason at all. So, a few negatives, but overall DayZ is an amazing game and I'd recommend it to anyone. You should at least have one good playthrough of that. Conan Exiles, of course. A game of absolute love and hate for me. I could probably do a dozen videos on everything right and everything wrong with Conan. To me, there's no comparable survival game experience, but that's not necessarily a good thing either. With what was dynamic combat before the introduction of cavalry, for instance, the PvP always presented new challenges, new bases to raid, new threats to defend against, making it one of the most engaging PvP survival games I've played, pretty much by far. And the base building aspect itself also gave unparalleled creative freedom to how you wanted to build your castle and your base, and it has so much content fundamentally as well, like the depth and lore to it all. It's just wholly enjoyable. But then you get to the downside, and there are massive downsides. The game suffers from so many issues. For every fix, there are at least 2 fundamental bugs introduced. They should call that Funcom's law. Every attempt to balance the combat has fundamentally made it worse, requiring less skill, the current meta being horses, numbers, and spears. Usually the first hit gets the first kill. Just ride, stab, ride, stab. But for me, the worst problem of Conan Exiles definitely came from the development and their stance towards the community. It resulted in a failure to get a handle on the exploiters and the hackers that plagued Official. For the first few years post-release, they largely ignored the problem, just not talking about it. Generally, if there was an exploit, they'd fix it eventually, but not actually address the problem. So, then only to release later a official community standards document on the rules. Part of the problem with that now is your reports will go up to 2 months with a delay, meaning often the server has been fundamentally gutted by the cheaters, and any undermeshing evidence, for instance, is long gone, and all the resources of the entire server is body vaulted on one of their alts. Unofficial servers, this could be a way to resolve some of the administrative issues we've seen with officials on Funcom, but the fundamental core gameplay seems like it will never be properly balanced, and you'll always yearn for this kind of sense of permanence with Conan Exiles that you'll never quite be able to get, fundamentally, and you definitely won't get that with unofficials. So largely the game just, I don't think it will ever meet its promised potential, and it has some of the highest potential of the genre by far. And lastly, we come to Ark Survival Evolved. Fundamentally one of the real power hitters of the genre. The core gameplay is fantastic. The thrill of capturing your first terror in Ark and then flying around on his back is an experience few games can match. And as you dive deeper into the game, you will start to unlock better techs, capture more exotic dinos and dragons, and then ultimately start breeding them for better stats. Through a breeding process that I suppose would put the Lannisters from Game of Thrones to shame. But for me, the peak of this game is the capture, breed, and build aspects, which are all hugely fun in their own right. However, I've done some endgame PvP and base defense, and it just seems so formulaic, it kind of lacks all excitement. The general process being soak with a golem, heal with a snow owl, till the turrets run out, then blast your way through. Sometimes you get some good dino fights back and forth, but usually it's just one side is outmatched with better breeds, and then they're overwhelmed, so that's usually how that goes. So the PvP just doesn't do it for me. Also, the game is kind of too hardcore on the breeding aspect on official. Breeders have to work as if it's an actual job, in shifts no less, in such a way that if it was a normal job, I'm fairly sure it would be illegal. And they have to do this over real life days, doing imprints, trying to get the best stats to create the best dino lines, and this takes them so much time, and sometimes the breeds are just terrible, and they don't know it until it's done. And fundamentally, that is not fun. That is punishing your player base for playing the game. So I cannot recommend that aspect, but I really did enjoy Ark. I really enjoyed the early game of Ark. I found that to be perhaps the best early game in the survival genre I've played. That gave me the most fun. So it really is a decent game. But if you're a hardcore PvP fanatic, I'm not sure this will actually do it for you, but to each their own. Well, that does it for me for my rundown of survival games in 2020. If you like what you see, hit the like. If you don't, do nothing. If you want to follow my content, click subscribe and ring the bell. And if you got any other ideas of survival games that's worth checking out, leave your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks guys, been working hard to improve my editing skills, so I hope you like this one.